And good morning, my beautiful America. Welcome back to the All American Book Club. Ladies and gentlemen, we are launching America 250 here at the All American Book Club, live here in our nation's capital. And we are bringing back to the show a dear friend, a favorite author, Melody Carlson. We are going to be talking about her brand new book, All Booked Up. But we're also going to be talking about her four-part World War II series, The Mulligan Sisters. So please help me welcome to the show, Melody Carlson. I'm so glad to have you back, and I'm so excited to talk about World War II. You have inspired me.
Well, thank you for having me back. World War II inspired me, I have to say. It's
Well, I sat here and read your books, The Mulligan Sisters, and I could not put them down. And you reminded me of such a powerful generation, what we always termed as the greatest generation. But you said a lot of your family members really inspired these books for you. Can you talk about some of that?
yeah, I grew up, I had a single working mom, and she was actually more like a teenager during World War II. So when she would talk about that, she would just like feel left out. But her older siblings and cousins, they were all in the service. And I spent a lot of time, my sister and I, at my grandparents' house. Well, my grandparents' house would have photographs of them in their various forms of service and stories. And just, you just felt like you kind of would go back in time in my grandparents' house. And so I would hear stuff that probably the average kid my age maybe wasn't hearing. And I just thought it was fascinating. And it just sounded exciting. And my grandparents had owned stores, like grocery stores during that time. So they were all, I would hear that. I would even find things like their old rationing coupons and old calendars and old Life magazines. I mean, just stuff that was just like you're in this little museum.
Right, right,
And
exactly.
and then I even had heard stories about my uncle who did pass away right after the war of having PTSD. I mean, they didn't call it PTSD, but
Right,
they knew
right.
that it changed him. And he was in Europe in some of the really nasty stuff and was never the same when he came back because he was like this really tender-hearted person. And so, and just a lot of different stories that, I grew up
Mhm.
with. And I just felt like I need to write this somehow. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I thought from the women's perspective, because that's what I was mostly hearing, because I had a lot of aunts who'd,
Mhm.
like one aunt who did work it was a battery factory. They made batteries for the planes. And
Right.
just, so you'd hear these stories. And yeah, I thought the women's stories were kind of powerful.
Well, it is Women's History Month, and we're launching with my choice to launch your books and launch this month for America 250, but also Women's History Month. And a lot of people we're bringing over to the show are talking about different times in history. So we're going to bring over a combat fighter pilot, female combat fighter pilot who was in Afghanistan. We're going to bring over a former White House staff member on protocol talking about the first ladies. We're going to be bringing over, those who are writing books on America 250 and devotions for the nation. And then I have been, I think you knew this. I love aviation. And so I've been inviting women who are historians to talk about WASP, which is plural, Women Air Force
Yep.
Service Pilots. Um, so there is a theme that so many people, including my clients in this business, have come alongside and said, let's do this. Let's tell these stories because a lot of them have been somewhat unwritten by the current political climate or have been unwritten, from school. So we want to bring them back. We don't want this missing puzzle of patriotism in this next generation. We want them to know what patriotism stands for. So I'm going to highlight the first book. I'll be seeing you. So first book in the Mulligan series opens up Pearl Harbor at Catholic Mass, find out, their brother is missing. And you have the Mulligan sisters all living with their family. And let's talk about the community that they were in a community that just come out of the First World War, and they were starting to get back on their feet. And you highlight that and they own a store, like you referred to your family owning a store. Why don't we talk about the opening of Pearl Harbor and really that initial effect that it had on the family? Because it reminded me of our family as well. So I'll share that.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up hearing about Pearl Harbor too, and when you'd hear it from the people that experienced it, it was so mind-boggling. I mean, it's just so dramatic. It kind of just really split their world, and they're feeling like, yeah, we did just survive the first great war that was the war to end all wars. And
Right.
suddenly we are under attack. I mean, obviously they knew what was going on in Europe because they didn't live under a stone, but I'm sure that they were just telling themselves it can't happen again, because
Right.
it
Right.
just was unfathomable. It hadn't even been that long. I mean, it was literally the next generation. Their dads had served in World War One,
Yes.
and
Yes.
it's that is just kind of, yeah, that is mind-boggling.
Well, and you refer to it in the characters that you described, the father, the neighbor's father, both served in the previous war and what they went through. Um, One thing as we look at modern day, I think the military family component, the veteran component, we live in a different time period where they did in that time period, like you said, that shell shock. They did not talk about PTS. They didn't talk about a lot of the things. And a lot of the times, like you highlight in this first book, Peter, the oldest son, he didn't come home. Um, he was in the Arizona that went down. And that was a factor for a lot of families. And I sat there and read that part and I thought, oh my gosh, this is my grandmother's story. She never talked about it.
Yeah.
I found out that her brother had passed in the Battle of the Bulge. And
Mm.
here's what happened. It's the same thing as Peter's story that um, they had a casket, but they were told never to open it.
Mm.
And she believed before she passed, she believed he was not in there more than anything.
Yeah.
And it's similar to that cemetery that they had set up for Peter in the book, where they talk about they gave him a gravestone, similar to like Pearl Harbor, the movie there. They gave him gravestones to go remember, go place
Mhm.
flowers, but obviously they never got to receive anything back from them. And it just reminded me a lot of that. And it almost came across as I read that part of the book. It seemed very common where we sit here today and we're like, okay, it's just so not common today, but it seemed very common back then.
Yeah, and I know people nowadays, I feel like, have higher expectations of recovery and things like
Right.
that. Whereas then, and maybe it was because they had just come out of World War One, and there were so many, like if you've seen those graveyards in Europe with all the, white
Yes.
crosses, like,
Yes.
and so they were sort of maybe aware of that, but it still had to be hard. And one of the saddest parts of the book that I remember was when Molly's sewing the gold cross for her brother
Right.
Peter, because she
Right.
loves Peter so much, and it's just like, ah,
Yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love the character Molly. I think she is my favorite out of all. And you talk a lot about Molly with writing letters to the troops, which I think has it's died away in modern day. Um, you talk about the victory gardens and the things that she did because of the rationing during that time period. And I sat there and I took those themes and I made them themes for the rest of this year, where we can implement in April, month of the military child, ways for the military child to write essays about the importance of their service in America's 250th birthday. And then for May, month of the military spouse, month of the military family, and incorporating the victory garden with doing something for Gold Star moms for Mother's Day. So talk a little bit about the letters between Molly that then ended up with Patrick. And then some of the letters and those telegrams, the telegrams that they
Mhm.
would get that they didn't want to get, but ended up always, always turning out most of the time were good, but on some sides they weren't. And then talk about also the victory gardens.
Yeah, well, my grandma had saved all their. I remember them being yellow telegrams. They had a different word for them. It wasn't, but yeah, that
The
were
V-gram or something. It was,
yes,
yeah,
yeah. And then yeah, some of them probably were regular telegrams too. But fortunately, my grandparents didn't get one of those. But although they did lose their son shortly after, which we feel like was related to the PTSD. But anyway,
that's a big deal though. That's a big deal.
yeah, um, yeah. Just I well, my because I'd heard a little bit of my mom's stories, and she's a funny lady. She's not around any longer, but she always felt like she was missing out, like kind of
Mm.
Molly does too, because she's too
Yeah,
young, and so poor Molly's trying to grow up faster. She does end up going up faster, which my mom did the same thing. But Molly is, devoted to Peter. Peter was her favorite sibling. And then
right.
Patrick was kind of his best friend. And so I think she kind of replaces sort of, writing to Peter, which she
Right.
can't do, writing to Patrick. And then, of course, well, I won't give things away, but he tries to take on a big brotherly role too, because he only had one brother.
Yeah,
And these poor
exactly. With all
girls,
the sisters. Yeah.
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 And their dad is not doing too well.
Right.
So, yeah. But yeah, the letters, the correspondence, and then when she heard about, she also she'd gather, the rubber tires from bikes and tinfoil and metals and all the stuff that they were
Yeah.
recycling, which
Yeah.
didn't seem like a big deal to her. I know it did, but it's not like you're going to be a nurse like your sister or
Right.
your anyway. But I mean, America needed that stuff because we hadn't even recovered from World War I. We didn't have all of yeah, so just to build things. And in the meantime, Germany and Japan are over there just like pumping it out really
Yeah.
fast.
Well, I
But
mean,
so
yeah, the whole sugar rationing thing where they had to save up,
yes,
that had to save
yes.
up so they could make a cake for a birthday or a cake for a special occasion. Yeah.
And then you had hoarders who would somehow get a hold of other people's rationing coupons, and they'd go buy sugar that they didn't even deserve. I remember my grandma talking about that, because she still kind of would have that mindset sometimes about using sugar. And
Yeah.
because they'd also gone through the Great Depression, and they'd had their whole town burned down too. So she had this very frugal side to her, even though they didn't have to be. But so yeah, the rationing, the Molly, also the Victory Garden, it kind of did become a
Yes.
big deal because a lot of so many farmers and servicemen, a lot of them got to stay home and do the farms, but there was a lot of things that didn't get done. So for the women to do victory gardens could be the difference between having food or not. And of course Molly would share it. She was so sweet. I loved it when she befriends the old neighbor too.
Well,
She's
and
just
you
a
know what?
darling.
I love that part because it was a reminder to me. I love my neighbors, but it was a reminder that the older and the younger can always meet in the middle. And there's always a special bond that you created through your writing with both Molly and the neighbor, Mrs. Bet Mrs. Bentley, Mrs. Beckley.
Can't
Yeah,
remember.
Mrs. Beckley, I think it is. Yeah, Mrs. B.
Yeah.
I'll call her Mrs. B.
This is B, yeah.
But Mrs. B. But as we go, as there are three more, I want to highlight two of my other favorite parts, and then we'll go over and talk about your brand new books. I want to make sure we highlight that too. The Hollywood Canteen and the USO and the whole Rosie the Riveter. And I guess you could say Colleen is my second favorite because she taps into all three. She taps into the Hollywood Canteen when she becomes an actress. She was doing the USO when back then they said the USO was like not the place to be. It was the place to kind of like the local bar, I guess. Right. And I was
Except they
surprised.
didn't drink. They didn't drink there, but they would sometimes treat the girls who worked there like they weren't nice girls, which wasn't
Right.
true. And yeah, and she had been Rosie the Riveter kind of person, sort of. She wasn't that
Yeah.
good at it,
No,
but
no,
that's where
she wasn't.
she got discovered there. But anyway, yeah. So the USO, some small towns and places would think it wasn't respectable,
Right.
which was sad. And then yeah, the Hollywood Canteen. Oh, I mean, I just love that, and I grew up hearing stories about that
Yeah.
too, because
Yeah. I
my
love
my
this book.
yeah, my
Yeah.
parents actually, I was born in San Francisco and they lived in San Francisco and they still had USO. And my mom, because she missed out on it, during World War II, but it was Korean War thing was going on. So she was working at the USO, which is where she met my dad, he was in the Navy. That's another story. But so she's trying to relive those glory years that she missed out on. But I
It
remember her
sounds like,
telling me about the Hollywood Canteen too, and she was like a model too. So she had that little bit of calling side to her. So I just grew up hearing the whole variety of different stories. But yeah, I want
what do
them
you think
all in the
really?
series.
Oh,
Huh.
well, you did. I mean, you captured so many. But what do you think out of the whole series impacted you personally in your life now as you were writing it, as you hear your mom and your dad's stories, your grandparents' stories, what do you think you have carried with you that is still threaded in time?
Well, it's probably the kind of the sisterhood and the strength of the women, and
Mhm.
we hear any kind of war stories, and of course, I mean the men are and historically been the ones that have been making what you would call the bigger sacrifices. Nowadays, I know that's different, but the women were making sacrifices too, and it took all of them together, a community, to get through this thing, and just the way that even neighbors bonded with neighbors and people, the camaraderie, the support. I love that. And I'm especially living in the present generation where we are a
Yeah,
little divided and divisive. It's like, oh
yeah,
man, we could just all have a dose of that. I don't want another, big war, but if
yeah.
we could just learn from them how to, bridge the great divide.
No, absolutely. Well, especially with current climate, with what we see happening in the Middle East. And, where can we come together again? Because as I was reading these books, I sat there, I remember messaging you, and I'm just sitting here thinking, these are great tools to give to this generation to say, here are ways that we can show our patriotism, our selfless service, our volunteerism, even here on the home front when we know there are things happening overseas.
Yeah.
And I mean, we just listed a bunch of ways we can get involved. But, I didn't share this with you. I'll share this really quickly. The oldest USO in the nation and the first one is here in my backyard.
Ah,
And I had the privilege to volunteer and work there for a couple of years. It's haunted, but it is the oldest. There are
that
stories.
makes
Oh
it
my
more
goodness.
interesting.
But
Yeah.
oh, it totally does. But it was I think that I always knew, watching my grandparents who were during that greatest generation time period and, always watching the USO and just how it excited people and it brought community together, which
Yeah.
we need more than ever. We need that more than
Yeah.
ever.
One thing, and I didn't put it in this series because it doesn't really relate, but my late husband, especially in his final years, if he saw anybody wearing any bit of a military veteran
Mhm.
kind of thing,
Yep.
he'd walk across a store. I mean, or follow them to the check. He did have
Yeah.
dementia, of course, but I mean, but he would just say thank you for your service, and then he would just like ask them, where were you and what, and they would just engage, and it was
Yes.
just so sweet. And it's like I'm trying to learn to do that myself. It doesn't come naturally to me. I feel like I'm being intrusive, but I loved how he did it.
To the
It
veterans.
helped that
Yeah.
he was 6'6" tall too, and when these little guys, they'd be looking at him, going, "Oh, you care about me," and it was a lovely moment. But yeah, just whatever way we can show support, I think is probably sweet.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. It goes a long way. So let's do this with just a minute and a half left. I love this book. I love all of your books, Melody Carlson. And I remember getting this over Christmas. I think yes, I texted you and I said, I got a book. And so I read it over Christmas. Love the characters, cast of characters. Boy, you had fun with this cast of characters. So, do you want to share a little bit about just the premise? And I can tell if you correct me if I'm wrong. I can tell though you wrote it from the perspective of now in this new season of your life.
Yeah. I mean, weirdly, I think to me it feels weird now. I wrote it right after my husband died because the book was due, and it was
Mhm.
actually good for me to have something to do because it was wintertime and it was better than just sitting around crying. And so of course
Right.
there's a widow in it, and the way the book was born, and now I'm trying to do my interviews for All Booked Up in my library, which you maybe can see behind me. This is not my office.
Yes.
My office has got a lot of books too, of my
Yes, it
books.
does.
But my books aren't here. This is a library, and we had just built our house and hadn't even been in it for 2 years before my husband got his diagnosis. I actually think it was only 1 year. Anyway, we've got this library with 17-foot high bookshelves, and
It's
the whole length of
amazing.
the room is huge. And I was sitting in here with a friend, and she said, if he passes, like, what are you going to do? Are you going to sell your house? And I'm just like, first of
Mhm.
all, I wanted to go, that's such a horrible question. I didn't appreciate
Yeah.
it. And then I looked up these books all, and I go, well, what do I do with all these books? Who's going to pack up all these books? And I just really flipped
Yes.
flipped it on her, and then and kind of the hint was I really don't want to have this conversation, but
Yeah.
after the fact, I thought that's a pretty funny way to start a book. I'm not funny, but like,
Yeah.
so this
Yeah.
woman is held hostage by her family's giant library, but
Yes. And I love that she
yeah,
fought back.
she did fight back, and she, unlike me, fortunately, I don't have a mortgage, but she had a lot of bills and stuff, and she was going to have to do something, but she decided to take in women instead, and so she took in, yeah, single women and kind of a certain age, and it got very interesting.
Yeah, no, it did. Adding the whole male factor to it. But I want to wish you a congratulations on your I'm just going to say umpteenth book. And
Yeah.
I want to encourage my audience to go pick it up. I have an extra copy, so I'm going to give out that free extra copy. I absolutely love this book. And I'm sitting here on pins and needles. When's my next Melody Carlson book coming out? So I'm not saying you're my favorite, but yes, you are.